In a small American town, David lives with his abusive father, William, after his mother left them when he was 5. At school, David enjoys spending time with his crush Millie, a girl who dreams of traveling the world. Knowing this, David gifts her a snow globe with the Eiffel Tower inside. Millie loves it, but their moment is interrupted by Marky, who mocks David and throws the snow globe onto the frozen lake. Determined to retrieve it, David steps onto the ice, but it breaks under his weight. As the freezing water engulfs him, David suddenly vanishes from the lake, only to reappear in a library. Shocked, he decides to ignore what just happened and heads home. William immediately yells at him for being late, so David locks himself in his room. An enraged William starts pounding on the door, and just as he's about to break it down, David suddenly vanishes and reappears in the library. Finally realizing that he possesses supernatural abilities, David returns home, grabs his savings, and runs away to start a new life. Before leaving town, he stops by Millie's house and leaves the snow globe so she knows he's alive and well. David then moves to the city, rents a small, dark room in a motel, and begins testing his powers. At first, David crashes into trees while trying to teleport, but eventually he figures it out by looking at photos of places he wants to visit. His first successful teleportation is to the Empire State Building, a place filled with warm memories from his childhood. Feeling more confident, David scopes out a bank, familiarizing himself with its interior, and later that night, he teleports inside the vault to steal all the money. As David celebrates in his small motel room, the bank discovers the robbery, and Roland, posing as an NSA agent, investigates. Roland has experience with similar cases and knows about the existence of jumpers, suspecting that one of them is responsible. 8 years later, David is living his best life. He has a luxurious penthouse in New York, filled with expensive items, and has such control over his powers that he even uses them just to get to the kitchen. His walls are covered with photographs of famous landmarks, allowing him to easily teleport anywhere in the world. He spends his days doing things like having a picnic on top of the Sphinx or visiting other exotic locations on a whim. One evening, David finds himself in London and enters a pub. His careless actions catch the attention of Griffin, another jumper. However, David ignores Griffin and leaves with a girl without acknowledging him. Meanwhile, a jumper teleports into the middle of a tropical jungle, only to get caught in a network of wires that prevent him from teleporting again. This trap was set by Roland and his team, known as Paladins, who hunt jumpers. Without hesitation, Roland kills the man and soon receives a phone call about their next lead. Later, David returns to his apartment and finds Roland there. David tries to escape, but Roland strikes back with a specialized baton that electrocutes him, preventing David from teleporting further than a few feet into the apartment. David manages to teleport to a secret room hidden in the wall. Roland follows the cable and starts to break the wall, but David grabs a bunch of money and teleports away. Roland checks the photos and sends his men to follow David. He also finds an old picture of Millie. A few seconds later, David shows up in his old room. William hears the commotion and rushes to meet his son, saying that he feels he is going crazy and that David could come home at any time. The next morning, David thinks about visiting William but can't bring himself to talk to him. Instead, he goes to Millie's house, where Millie's mother is shocked to see David alive and hugs him. She informs him that Millie is working at a local bar. David heads there but immediately feels like a coward again when he sees the older Millie. David tries to leave but is spotted and confronted by Mark, who immediately recognizes him and starts asking questions. He is heard by Millie, who tells him that she saw David when he arrived and was waiting for him to say something. This makes Mark jealous and he tries to attack Millie, causing David to hit him for it. This causes a fight that ends outside, giving David a chance to push Mark through the fence and teleport him away while no one is looking. They appear inside the bank vault that David robbed, and David threatens Mark with worse before disappearing, leaving Mark in the vault as punishment. David then returns to the bar and finally talks to Millie, who gave up her dream of traveling because she had to face reality. David tells her that he works in banking and offers her to go to Rome with him, which Millie obviously accepts. This is overheard by Griffin, who is somehow in the bar too. Meanwhile, Roland shows up at the police station posing as a CIA agent and beats up a detective when he doesn't believe him. He interrogates Mark and says he believes his crazy story about teleportation. Happy at having found an ally, Mark tells Roland about David and Millie. Roland immediately summons his team and sets off for Italy. A few hours later, David and Millie arrive in Rome and check into a luxury hotel. Millie is suspicious of David's work, but he swears he is not lying. Eventually, they try to enter the Colosseum, but find that it is closed. David and Millie continue to explore the Colosseum. When they find a locked door, David teleports inside to unlock it and pretends that he just found a way in. As they wander, they enjoy the history associated with these sites. In one of the lower sections of the Colosseum, David unexpectedly runs into Griffin. David is surprised to see Griffin in the Colosseum and tries to ignore him. However, Griffin berates him for his reckless behavior and tells David about the Paladins, a group dedicated to hunting down jumpers like him. Griffin explains that the Paladins are the real threat and that they will not stop until all the jumpers are dead. At this point, a group of Paladins arrive and a fight breaks out. David is incapacitated by an electrified cable, but Griffin quickly enters the fray, using his teleportation skills to defeat his attackers. A Colosseum employee suddenly appears and Griffin immediately disappears. Wasting no time, David jumps into the rift left by Griffin's teleportation and finds himself in his secret desert hideout. An enraged Griffin reminds David that he left Millie behind, and David quickly teleports back to rescue her. Unfortunately, the police are waiting for them outside and both are arrested. 8 hours later, the police attempt to question David but are unable to officially detain him until a representative from the American embassy arrives. To David's surprise, that representative turns out to be Mary. She releases him from his handcuffs and advises him to flee before the Paladins arrive. David tries to follow her to get answers, but his path is blocked by a policeman. In response, David teleports the policeman to Egypt and returns to the station, where he informs Millie that the police have released them. Millie, skeptical, demands an explanation. David asks her to trust him and takes her to the airport. Millie, perplexed as to why they are running if everything seems to be in order, insists on answers. David shows her a bag full of money, but tells her they can't be together anymore. Feeling cheated, Millie decides to fly back to her hometown alone. Meanwhile, Roland's team informs him that they have been defeated, as if someone knew they were coming. Roland visits William, who pretends he hasn't seen his son in 8 years. William also says he won't tell the police if he meets David, which Roland doesn't like. Meanwhile, David returns to Griffin's hideout and learns that Griffin is tracking down the Paladins to kill them since they've been hunting teleporters for centuries. Griffin warns that if they can't catch the teleporter, they will attack his loved ones, much to David's dismay. After making sure Millie is safe, David teleports to his old house and finds William dead on the floor. Grief-stricken, David teleports the body to the hospital, but the doctors can't save him. Enraged, he goes to the police station and threatens Mark until he admits to telling Roland about his hometown and David's feelings for Millie. David realizes he must catch Roland before Millie lands in the US. He teleports to Griffin's hideout to steal information about the Paladins and ask Griffin to work together, but Griffin refuses, preferring to work alone. David continues to follow him, and after much persuasion, Griffin agrees to help. They teleport to the airport, but Millie has already left. At her apartment, David hears the Paladins approaching and tries to convince her of the truth, eventually teleporting her to Griffin's hideout. Griffin warns that the Paladins may be following them through the wormholes. Soon Roland and his team find Millie, and David learns that his mother, Mary, is also a Paladin. When Roland captures David, Griffin intervenes and they fight while teleporting across the world. David eventually saves Millie by teleporting her to safety, leaving Roland in an isolated cave. A few days later, David tracks down Mary, who confesses that she abandoned him because of his abilities. She refuses to give up her job as a paladin, and after realizing that his mother is the enemy, David leaves. He reunites with Millie, and they travel to warmer climes together.